If you're between 65 and 85, there are 5 abilities you may still have that quietly tell you something about how well you're aging in real life, and there's a good chance you've never once given yourself credit for them. Think about this morning. Before your coffee, you probably got out of a chair without a second thought. No pushing off the armrests, no pausing to steady yourself. You just stood up and got on with your day. Nobody noticed. Nobody was supposed to. But there may come a day when that same ordinary movement gets watched: a daughter hovering nearby just in case, a son reaching out a hand before you've asked for one. And once people start watching for the moment something gets hard, it's easy to start watching yourself the same way. That's what happens to so many people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. You get handed a mental list of everything to be careful about: the stairs, your balance, your memory, until aging starts to feel like a countdown of what you're about to lose. But there's another side to aging that deserves just as much attention: the things that are still working, quietly, every ordinary day, without asking for credit. This isn't a diagnosis, and it's not a test you pass or fail. It's simply a different way of looking at your own life, noticing what's holding steady, instead of only counting what's gotten harder. There are 5 abilities in particular. Some are physical. Some have more to do with memory, attention, and the way your mind holds a thought. And one of them is so ordinary, you likely did it today without ever realizing it was worth noticing. So let's start with the one people notice last and appreciate least. The doorbell rings, and Frank's already up out of his recliner before he's given it a thought. No push off the armrests. No pause to find his footing. He crosses the room and opens the door, half expecting the mailman, wondering if that package finally came in. His body isn't on his mind at all. The door is. Chances are, that's you too. More mornings than you'd guess. Up from the kitchen table once the coffee's done. Across the room to grab the phone before it stops ringing. You didn't plan it. You just did it, the way you always do, without a second of hesitation. So why does something this ordinary deserve a second look at all? Because it isn't really one motion. Standing up is several things happening together. Your leg muscles are pushing your whole body weight up against gravity. Your core is holding you steady so you don't pitch forward or lean too far back. Your eyes and your inner ear are working together behind the scenes, telling your brain exactly where up is. Your knees and ankles are making small corrections the whole way, keeping you balanced once you're there. All of it, coordinated by your nervous system, happening in under a second, and you never gave it a single instruction. What does it actually mean then, when your body still handles something like that entirely on its own? Frank's daughter calls most Sundays. She asks about his knee, whether he's sleeping all right, whether he's keeping up with his blood pressure. She's never once mentioned the way he gets up out of that chair. Why would she? It doesn't look like anything worth bringing up. But it's the same ability that lets him get his own coffee instead of waiting for someone to bring it. Answer his own door instead of needing someone nearby just in case. Walk to the kitchen because he wants to, not because someone's helping him get there. None of that looks dramatic from across the room. It just quietly shapes how much of the day still belongs to him. I want to be careful here, because this isn't something you pass or fail. Some days it's harder: a sore knee, a new prescription, a rough night's sleep, and none of that means anything is fundamentally wrong. Function has good days and harder ones, like most things in life. If it's been getting noticeably harder for you lately, that's simply worth a conversation with your doctor. But if you're still doing it the way Frank does, without a second thought, that can be one piece of a bigger, encouraging picture, a small, everyday sign that the strength and balance you've built over the years are still there when you reach for them. If this first ability is something your body handles almost without your permission, what would the next one look like? Not something anyone could see from across the room. Not something you'd notice happening, even in yourself. Something that only shows up in the middle of an ordinary conversation, the kind you have every day, without ever thinking twice about it. Walt's car wouldn't start on a Saturday morning, and just like that, Frank's whole plan changed. It had been simple enough: meet at the hardware store at 10, grab brackets for the gutter, be home before the Cardinals game. Instead, he drove over and picked Walt up himself, tried a different store clear across town, grabbed lunch somewhere along the way, because by then, the morning was already gone. He didn't stand around getting worked up about it. He just kept going. By 2, the gutter was fixed anyway. You've had a morning like that. Maybe not a car, an appointment that got rescheduled, a store that turned out to be closed when you finally got there. Small stuff, mostly forgotten by the following week. What actually happens in that moment, though, when the thing you were counting on just falls apart? Some people get knocked sideways by it. The rest of the day feels off after that. Other people shift and just keep moving, without even registering they've done anything. If that's you, there's more happening underneath than it feels like from the inside. There's a term for it. For what it's worth, cognitive flexibility. Really, it just means this. Your plan changes. You take in what's actually going on now, and you adjust instead of getting stuck on what was supposed to happen. Simple enough to say. Not always simple to do. First, you have to actually let go of the plan you were counting on. And that's where people get stuck at any age, holding on to something after it's already stopped making sense. So why does one person shake off a broken plan in 5 minutes, while someone else stays stuck on what was supposed to happen for the rest of the day? Frank's daughter calls most weeks, asks about his knee, whether he's been sleeping all right. She's never once asked how he handles it when a plan like that falls apart. Why would she? It's not the kind of thing anybody thinks to ask about. But it might be one of the more encouraging things going on with him, not proof of anything on its own, since a rough night's sleep can throw anybody off, but worth noticing all the same. Because that's really what an ordinary life looks like, the longer you live one. Not some smooth, uninterrupted routine, plans falling apart and getting patched back together, over and over, in ways nobody bothers writing down. The person who can keep doing that is still very much running their own day, not because everything goes right, because they don't need it to. We've looked at what your body still does on its own, and how your mind can stay present with someone in a conversation, and now this bending a little when the day won't cooperate. But the next ability doesn't live in your body alone, and it doesn't live in your mind alone either. It shows up in the moment the two of them have to work together, and chances are you've been using it for years without ever realizing what it was doing for you. We've looked at what your body still does on its own, how your mind stays with someone through a whole conversation, and how it bends when a plan falls apart. This one's a little different. It's not really about your body or your mind by itself. It's about the split second they have to work together, with no time to sort it out beforehand. Frank's crossing the kitchen with a mug of coffee, half thinking about whether the Cardinals game got rained out, when his neighbor's dog cuts right in front of him with zero warning. He steps sideways, shifts his weight, keeps walking, doesn't spill a drop, and honestly doesn't even fully register what happened until a second later. His mind was on baseball. His body took care of the dog. You've had a version of that yourself. Reaching into a cabinet with one hand full of groceries, stepping around a chair somebody left pulled out further than it usually sits, catching yourself on a step you misjudged by half an inch. None of it feels like anything while it's happening. It's just what happens between one step and the next. What actually has to happen that fast, though, for your body to get there before you've even finished thinking about it? More than you'd guess. Your eyes catch the dog. That gets processed fast enough to matter. Something in you decides what to do about it. A signal travels down to your legs and your arm, all while you're still holding a mug of hot coffee. Attention, quick judgment, physical coordination happening together. On their own, none of it consciously managed. There's a term for it: motor coordination. But really, it's just your body and mind still talking to each other, the way they've been doing since you were a toddler, figuring out how to walk without holding on to the furniture. Here's the strange part of it. Nobody ever compliments you for not spilling the coffee. Nobody calls to say, "I heard you caught yourself on the stairs today. Nice work. The moment just disappears because nothing went wrong. And that's exactly why it's so easy to miss the times everything works out perfectly, are the times nobody, including you, ever stops to notice. How many moments like that do you think you've already had today without giving a single one of them a second thought? Probably more than you'd want to count. Adjusting your grip on a bag before it slips. Turning toward a sound and already knowing which way to move. Nobody taught you any of that in a classroom. You built it, one ordinary afternoon at a time, over 60, 70, 80 years of just living your life. You don't remember learning how to step around a chair or catch yourself when you stumble. You just got good at moving through your own world, so gradually, you never noticed it happening. I want to be straight with you, though. One smooth step around a dog doesn't prove anything about your health. Some days that same moment goes differently. You're tired, distracted, your hips acting up. That's ordinary, and it doesn't mean anything's wrong. If you ever notice a real lasting change in your balance or coordination, that's worth bringing up with your doctor. But one moment isn't a verdict. It's the pattern, over time, that actually tells you something. So that's 4 now. Strength that shows up without asking. A mind that stays with the people you're talking to. A mind that bends instead of breaking when plans fall apart. And now your body and your brain, working as a team all day long without you ever having to hire them for the job. 4 abilities, all hiding in plain sight in the middle of ordinary Tuesdays. And the 5th one might be the hardest to spot of all, not because it's complicated, but because you've almost certainly done it today already. And it never once occurred to you that it counted for anything. We've spent 4 sections looking at things your body and mind do, almost, without you asking them to. This last one's different. It doesn't live in your legs. And it doesn't live in how fast you react when a dog cuts across your path. It lives somewhere quieter than that. A guy showed up in Frank's driveway a while back, clipboard in hand, talking fast about driveway sealant. Said he was already doing the Henderson's place 2 doors down, had some extra material, could give Frank a deal if he said yes today. Frank let him get about halfway through it, nodded, and said, "Not today, but thanks for stopping by." That was it. No lecture. No irritation. The guy packed up and left. Frank went back to whatever he'd been doing. It didn't feel like a decision to him. It just felt obvious, the way a familiar street looks obvious once you've driven it 1,000 times. What if one of the most useful things you've built over the years isn't something you'd ever think to call an ability? Frank wasn't weighing anything in that driveway. He wasn't running through a checklist. He just knew, almost the second the guy opened his mouth, roughly how the conversation was going to go. Not because he's especially sharp, because he's heard some version of that pitch a dozen times over the years. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he learned to spot it. What do you catch now in half a second that would have taken you an hour to work out at 30? A phone call that sounds a certain way before the person's even said what's wrong. A look on your daughter's face that tells you she's had a rough week before she said a word about it. You've built a kind of shorthand for that stuff, and it happens so gradually you probably never noticed it happening. There's a term for it, if you want one crystallized knowledge. Put simply, it's the kind of knowledge that comes from actually living through things, rather than the kind that comes from thinking fast. It doesn't mean you process everything quicker than you used to. Some things do take a little longer these days, and that's normal and separate from this. This is about recognizing a shape you've seen before, not about speed. Frank's grandson called him a couple weeks after that, worked up about something at his job, a coworker who wasn't pulling his weight, a manager who wouldn't deal with it, the whole thing dragging on for months. Frank didn't offer him a plan. He didn't tell him what to do. Mostly he just said, "Yeah, that kind of thing usually works itself out one way or another. Give it some time." Not much, on paper. But his grandson didn't call for a solution. He called because some part of him already knew Frank had been through something like it before, even if he couldn't have said exactly when or how many times. What does somebody who's lived through 60 or 70 years of ordinary problems know that a 25-year-old just hasn't had time to learn yet? I should say this plainly, because it matters. This isn't about always being right. Frank's been caught off guard plenty of times. Same as anybody. Experience doesn't mean perfect judgment. It just means more material to draw from. This isn't a medical test, and it doesn't prove anything about anyone's health. If something about your thinking or memory genuinely changes in a way that concerns you, that's a conversation worth having with your doctor, a separate matter from what we're talking about here. Most people spend a lot of time noticing what's gotten harder as they've gotten older. The stares, the names, the mornings that used to come easier. Almost nobody spends the same amount of time noticing what all those years actually left behind, because that's what this whole video has really been about. Getting up out of a chair without a second thought. Staying with somebody through a whole conversation instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. Bending instead of breaking when a plan falls through. Your body and mind working together in the half second it takes to step around something in your path. And now this knowing a situation before it's finished explaining itself, because you've already lived through it more than once, in one form or another. None of that proves anything on its own. That was never really the point. The point is that you didn't just collect birthdays over the years. You collected people. You collected situations. You collected experience. Most of that you're probably still using, every day, whether you've stopped to count it or not. You've probably noticed the extra beat before you stand up now, the railing you didn't used to need, the name that takes a few seconds longer to surface than it used to. Yes, some things have changed. But there's another side of getting older that almost nobody stops to look at. A few months back, Frank's granddaughter sat down at his kitchen table, upset about something, a decision, one of those things that feels enormous at 22. Frank was still in his work shirt, hadn't even sat down for dinner yet. He pulled out a chair anyway, sat across from her, and listened. Not much more than that. He asked a question here and there. He didn't try to solve anything. At some point, mid-sentence, she just stopped and said, "I don't know why, but I feel better already." Frank didn't really have an answer for that. He just does that. He always has. He's never once thought of it as something he was good at. Somewhere along the way, without him ever deciding to, that became who he is. Not something he built on purpose. Something that just settled into him, the way water finds its way into the low places of a yard after enough rain quietly. Over years, until one day it's simply there, and you can't remember the yard without it. Here's something worth thinking about tonight. You may never know all the things you've left behind in other people. A phrase you used to say, showing up now in your daughter's voice when she talks to her own kids, and she probably doesn't even hear herself say it. The particular way you listen unhurried, patient, that your granddaughter will carry into some conversation years from now, with somebody you'll never meet. And she won't remember where she learned it either. None of that gets written down anywhere. But it's out there, living quietly in the people you love. So here's the question I actually want to leave with you tonight. Not what's gotten harder this year. What do you know now, simply because you've lived long enough to know it? Sit with that for a second. If something comes to mind, something you didn't understand at 30, something that only came from actually living through it, write it down in the comments. Not for me. For whoever happens to be reading tonight, wondering if the hard years actually taught them anything, and needing to see that somebody else learned the exact same thing, the exact same hard way. We'll be here, having this same kind of conversation, whenever you want to have it again. Some things get harder with age, that much is true. But some things get quieter instead, and settle into the people around you so gently you never even feel them leave. You may not remember teaching anyone anything, but somebody out there remembers being taught.